Welcome, everyone, to the Revolution in the 21st Century Convention online here on Zoom Events. It has been a wonderful day of talks, workshops, panel discussions, breakouts. You've been an inspiring crew of people to co-create this event with, both challenging the established structures and thinking about how we build new ones. I'm so pleased to introduce this event with IPCC author Peter Carter, the director of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, a fantastic treaty that everyone must check out, Sephora Berman, and our wonderful moderator for the evening, Phoebe Plummer, who was one of the Just Stop Oil supporters who famously threw a can of soup onto the Van Gogh painting and was imprisoned and is now thankfully released and with us here this evening. Thank you all so much. Sadly, Adam McKay, who was hoping to join us, cannot anymore, but sends his apologies and his support. And hopefully Peter Kalmus, the NASA scientist, will also be joining us shortly. So with that, I'll pass over to Phoebe and let you guys take it ahead.
Great, thank you so much, Robin. Yeah, we're just going to begin by going to each of our speakers so that they can tell us a little bit about why the fossil fuel industry needs to be disrupted and how they're doing it. So I'm going to pass over to Peter first.
Okay, you want me to say something about the fossil fuel industry? Oh, thanks very much. No, that would be a pleasure. So the global emissions from the fossil fuel industry, etc., according to the IPCC, had to be going into decline by 2020. More recently, they said 2025, and that is to limit to 2 degrees C, and 2 degrees C is the catastrophic. It has always been the point of no return. And the fossil fuel industry, as far as I'm concerned, are involved in an axis of evil, basically. They are continuing to extract, continuing to burn more. Last year was a record fossil fuel CO2 emissions year. This year is not going to be very much better. And the governments, of course, are subsidizing. So that's the other part of the axis of evil. And the other one that doesn't get mentioned, but the NGOs are very good on this, is the banks, the big banks who are financing these fossil fuel projects. So that is ongoing. There has been no improvement on any of those criminal activities that are driving more and more fossil fuels, and that means driving our future away, away, away. I'll give you a quick point. I checked on the emissions, which is all important, right? Fossil fuel CO2 emissions have increased 50% since 1990. That was stunning to me when I checked on it yesterday. Methane emissions, 51%, and the other one, those are the two fossil fuel emissions, of course. So in other words, everything continues to get worse faster, and there is no constraint on the fossil fuel industry at all. My final point is I've been digging into the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. I had no idea it was as good and as strong as it is. So I can't explain to you why, what I know about climate policy and the COPs and all this, the Fossil Fuel Treaty is the only platform process that can work, and it is working well. That's my final comment, and really I'm amazed by it.
Brilliant, Peter. Thank you so much. And what a great introduction to our next speaker, Tazabra. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Peter, for your kind words. I've been such a fan and follower of your work for so many years. So that means a lot to me and to those of us who are working on the Fossil Fuel Treaty. You know, when we first proposed the Fossil Fuel Treaty now almost 5 years ago, people thought we were crazy, even within the climate movement. And meeting with now prime ministers and presidents around the world, frequently when I talk to them, they say, well, no, the Paris Agreement constrains production of fossil fuels. That's how we do that. And most of them don't even realize that the climate policy we have today at a national level or at an international level doesn't constrain the production of fossil fuels. It attempts to constrain the emissions and use of fossil fuels, but the supply and production of fossil fuels, not so much. There are very little constraints. Because for 30 years, the fossil fuel industry has been working to make their products invisible, and they've been successful in doing that. They've lied, they've denied climate change, they've delayed policy, and then they've flooded negotiations and consultations, diverting the attention, our attention, to the use of fossil fuels, to modeling that can warp the numbers to support continued production of fossil fuels while they work to reduce emissions through technologies supposedly like CCS or planting trees. And then simultaneously, they've been flooding the public space with advertising to make us feel like we don't have a choice, that we can't live without fossil fuels. And with the introduction of the personal carbon footprint now 20 years ago by BP, an oil company, they successfully diverted attention to our use, making us feel guilty for using fossil fuels, taking the onus right off them for production. For decades, the fossil fuel industry has been poisoning our rivers, polluting our air, leaving our children literally gasping for air. But I think most insidiously, they have been successful in stealing our imagination to imagine a world without them. And I think that's why I'm so excited about this gathering and this work, because we need to break free, not just of the infrastructure that keeps us tethered to these polluting technologies, but to the culture around fossil fuel use. In every region of the world, the fossil fuels advertising leaves us to fear scarcity, to fear price increases. They even now blatantly connect the use of gas stoves and cars with freedom. But being tethered to an infrastructure and a system that ensures dependency forever, then that's not freedom. The simple truth is when you build fossil fuel infrastructure, you buy a fossil fuel car or appliance, you're signing up to dependency on them for life. This is about power. And that's how they've made $2.8 billion a day, every day for the last 50 years. This industry is the most profitable industry in the world, and they use that money and power to continue to keep us hooked on those products. When you build electrification, when you buy a solar panel, you're breaking that cycle because no one owns the sun and the wind. The sun is not going to send you a bill next month. And that's why they're fighting so damn hard. This is an existential fight. And if we break that dependence cycle, it's a slippery slope for them. So I think one of the things I want to really leave people with is to remember that climate policy is complicated, and they make it complicated to try and disengage us but what's not complicated is 86% of the emissions trapped in our atmosphere smothering the earth come from three products: oil, gas, and coal. And we don't need them. What we build today will be what we use tomorrow. And they keep saying it's a transition and it's going to take time, but they keep growing the problem. It's not a transition if we're growing the problem. Right now, we're on track to produce 110% more oil, gas, and coal by 2030 than we can ever burn if we want to stay below 2 degrees. So we need steep supply constraints. Cutting only demand and emissions and not cutting supply is like trying to cut with one half of the scissors. So the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty does two important things. It unites us, the site fights and distant efforts all over the world to make us greater than the sum of our parts, to unite our power against this huge, powerful industry. Make no mistake, this is not about physical infrastructure. This is about power. Secondly, we're building a group of countries committed to fossil fuel phase out and identifying the barriers that are keeping them expanding fossil fuels. There are countries right now drilling for more oil, like Ecuador in the heart of the Amazon, just to feed their debt. So the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is doing research on trade agreements, tax agreements, debt relief, ways that countries can cooperate to break the cycle and free them from fossil fuels, and it's working. We now have 135 cities and subnationals that have joined the Fossil Fuel Treaty. We have almost 4,000 organizations in 120 countries, over 1 million individuals, and now 16 countries who have joined and are participating in the development of this fossil fuel treaty. Meeting in a couple weeks in Bonn, senior technical officials from actually almost 20 countries who will start designing the mechanisms under the treaty to cooperate. As more countries start to join and design the treaty, more countries will come because they don't want to be left out of that table. Sometimes this can feel really big. In fact, too big sometimes for individuals. But I want to remind you that every ton of carbon we save from going into the atmosphere right now will save lives. And this moment that we're living in, this is the last gasp of the fossil fuel industry. And they're fighting hard. But the fact is, we've already turned the corner. Renewable energy today is cheaper in about 82% of the world than fossil fuels. Renewable investment was double that of fossil fuels in 2023. Today on the planet, 1 in 5 cars that are sold are electric. We can do this. And let's not forget that we don't have to replace 100% of the fossil fuels, because this is the most inefficient system in the history of society. We only use about 30% of fossil fuels that we produce for electricity and heating and transport. The rest are just used to move more fossil fuels around and create more fossil fuels. In fact, 50% of the ships that are on the surface of the planet today are just to move fossil fuels around. We need to replace that 37%. And to do it, we have to come together and push our countries to cooperate to do that. And that's what we're doing with the Fossil Fuel Treaty. And that's what you're doing by standing up around the world against the expansion of fossil fuels. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. And very excitingly, whilst you were talking, Peter Kalmus has joined us. As I'm sure many of you will know, Peter is a NASA climate scientist and a civil disobedience advocate with Scientist Rebellion. So I'm going to pass over to Peter now to tell us a little bit about himself, his work, and how he disrupts the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here, everybody. Yeah, I don't know if I've got too much to add. That was all absolutely brilliant. I think so yeah, I mean, right now I do work for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory now, speaking on my own behalf, but like under the Trump administration, that's on a clock. Like that job will not last because climate science in the US is targeted, right? So there's that huge budget cuts at NASA that really target Earth science specifically, and Earth science missions that are critical for monitoring, essentially taking the temperature of the planet and monitoring sea level rise and monitoring the world's forests and monitoring the carbon cycle. So like a lot of those missions the Trump administration wants to cut just so these fucking billionaires can have even more money. And this is exactly how the fossil fuel industry works too, right? It's like they're basically selling us all out and selling out the planet so they can have bigger numbers in a database. It doesn't make any sense. I personally cannot imagine anything more evil than this. And I think the key thing here that's going to potentially shift everything pretty quickly, right? Because we know it's not a lack of alternatives that's stopping the transition, right? Because fossil fuels, I mean, renewable energy is already cheaper almost everywhere, right? So even if we were just kind of like going forward with a capitalist market-based approach, we would still be transitioning more quickly than this. It's the fucking fossil fuel clap, the CEOs, this industry that kind of has so much money that money's sort of like, so I started out in astrophysics, right? So a black hole works by just drawing in, it's so much mass that it has such a strong gravitational force that it just draws in more mass, and the black hole at the center of our galaxy just gets bigger and bigger. That's the way wealth under capitalism works as well, right? So the more wealth you have, that's like a wealth magnet. It draws more and more in, and it warps the space-time of our politics and our media and our information landscapes, right? So these evil people who, I'm sure they have ways to rationalize what they're doing. Like they have all these bullshit reasons like for why we should keep burning fossil fuels, but they really just want to continue getting more money and power. And they use that wealth to control our politicians, obviously with bribes. They call them campaign contributions, but they're bribes, and control our media landscape by buying newspapers, buying television stations, and spreading propaganda. So in my mind, somehow this is an informational war. It's a class war, but it's also the class war is being fought on an information battlefield. And we've been failing somehow. Our side, the side that wants to have a habitable planet, has we don't have as much money and as much organization. For 50 years, the fossil fuel industry has been spreading lies and has been winning this propaganda for people to have doubt about what's happening right in front of their noses, which is the overheating of our planet and all the impacts that go along with that. So I feel like there's two things that the climate movement has to really focus on right now. One of them is to join or become or like help birth this movement of movements, which I think is coming now. Right here in the U.S., we're fighting fascism as well. And so I'm sensing a real kind of coalescing of all these different movements, like the movement to stop genocides, the movement for healthcare. Like people are starting to realize that it's all the fucking billionaires, right? All of this stuff that's oppressing us and killing us and making it hard to just like live on this planet and to, for example, have kids on this planet. It all comes down to billionaires enclosing the culmination of hundreds of years of extractive colonial capitalism is now playing out with the billionaire class controlling everything, right? And I think they've gone too far because people are realizing this, right? That people are realizing more and more that what this really is a class war. So somehow we have to create this movement of movements and then figure out how to build bridges so that it's a working class movement and we can stop with the division with these kind of culture and ideological wars, the left versus the right and the working class, right? So everyone has to somehow learn how to put aside those differences. I know it's really hard because those issues are super important too. But to realize that the real problem is the billionaire class and kind of somehow unify, come together to fight the real problem. And then the second thing we have to focus on is how to let more and more people know of this evil that's being perpetrated by the billionaire and the fossil fuel class, to know that we do have solutions, but that they're blocking it for the sake of their own numbers and these meaningless numbers in databases, right? So anyway, that's kind of what I want to say right now, but it's, thank you so much for coming. And, we fight till the end because it's just the better thing to do, right? If we're going to go down, we're going to go down fighting for sure.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was brilliant. And yeah, we're now going to move on to more of a roundtable discussion between you all. So if people have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A section. You can find that button at the bottom of your screens. I'm aware some people have been sending questions in the chat, but there's also a load of amazing discussion going on in the chat. So sometimes those questions can get a bit lost. So if you can put them in the Q&A section, that would be great. And the first kind of discussion I want to bring up is what all of us speakers think is working and what's failing in the current efforts to stop fossil fuels. Peter, would you like to start us off?
Well, okay, yeah. So they're winning the propaganda war, as I was saying. So that's something that I really want to see us fix. I think we're slowly starting to turn the tides in the kind of on the legal battlefield. So I want to see a lot more lawsuits. I think that we've got the receipts of how the fossil fuel has been deceiving everybody for 50 years. So if we can get that sort of that gives us a real lever, I think, to try to take down these horrible people and these horrible corporations. So as impacts get worse and worse, I think courts around the world and judges around the world are going to start becoming more and more amenable to those sorts of legal battles. So bring lots of lawsuits. And somehow we have to, I'm working right now, the thing I'm working on the most and I'm the most interested in is trying to figure out how to do a little bit better on the informational side of things. Because, for example, having a bunch of climate scientists just doing their own individual social media has not been working so far.
Peter or Zephyr, I don't know if either of you wanted to come in on that.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for your comments, Peter Kalmus. I have not met you before, so it's a greatest pleasure to virtually meet you. There are a lot of scientists in the world, and there are a lot of scientists very, very busy on climate change, doing a lot of modeling. Peter Kalmus has a couple of special things about him, which makes him the most important scientist in the world today. And you'd have heard from him, he makes value judgments, okay? The scientists in general never make value judgments. They never comment on disasters and catastrophes, criminal operations of the fossil fuel industry, nor the evil of the fossil fuel industry and the axis of evil that I just mentioned. So that is what we have to make happen, because obviously we have to have the whole public behind us. We have to have the entire public signing on and writing with respect to the Fossil Fuel Treaty. Everybody has to do it because it's the only game in town. I'll very briefly explain why that is. The sort of game in town which has been going on for 30 years is the UN COP process. It was set up to fail. It's been failing for 30 plus years. The reason is they have fixed the voting. Any agreement to be made by the UN COP has to be unanimous, 100%. So year after year after year, the fossil fuel industry and the petrostates, they always win. There's never been anything agreed whatsoever. So we are completely dependent, and we have to make the call out to the people, the population of the world, as Roger Hallam is doing, right? Now, the call has to be based on the reality of what's happening. The reality of what's happening is our planet is being destroyed, wrecked before our very eyes. I have the data on it. I've been doing this for years. There's no question from the data sets that are increasing, getting worse, everything accelerating. You probably know that global warming is accelerating. It's still accelerating. It hasn't let up one little bit, and it's going to continue to do that as long as the fossil fuel industry is allowed to stay into business. So the second thing is to get the fossil fuel out of business. We have to stop these subsidies. Just about every country in the world is subsidizing fossil fuels, right? They make big plans, big intentions. They say that what their targets are. They never do anything about these targets. They're under UN. The fossil fuel industry is being subsidized by $7 trillion a year. And that's not only from the IMF now. This year, an economic panel with the European Commission examined the numbers again. And they found it came out to just over $7 trillion a year. So everybody knows, I think, it's been mentioned already, that clean energy, wonderful, brilliant, amazing clean energy, right, is cheaper, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper compared to the fossil fuel industry. So why isn't the renewable clean energy taking over 100%? It's very simple. Our governments are subsidizing, pouring our tax money into fossil fuels. They're using our tax money to destroy our lives. They're using our tax money so that we will have no future for the children in our lives. So the final point I want to make is this. Climate change, to me now, increasingly, is all about children. It's all about all the children in the entire world. It's very painful and very difficult to think about their future, but we have to.
Thank you, Peter. I want to jump in on a couple of points that have been made. First of all, I want to talk about what's not working, because for a really long time within kind of the climate movement, what we proposed were essentially market-based solutions using the system that is not working to constrain emissions of fossil fuels. And as Peter rightly pointed out, that doesn't work in large part because the markets are completely distorted by billions, trillions in fossil fuel subsidies. And there's, while every company or country that I have met with in the last 5 years acknowledges what's happening on climate change and that we need to phase out fossil fuels and use less fossil fuels, they all want to be the last barrel sold. So what we're seeing is that subsidies are increasing, not decreasing, because countries want to protect their industry. Well, as long as we use fossil fuels, says the UK government, the Canadian government, the Australian government, every government I met with, it might as well be ours, because ours are the best fossil fuels. And so that cycle will be broken only, in fact, through greater regulation and international cooperation. It's not going to be through the markets. If we leave climate policy up to the markets, to carbon credits, to carbon pricing, to all of the mechanisms that we have talked about so far, if we just assume that we're going to reduce demand and increase the price of carbon and the markets will constrain supply, we will fail, and we will fail from an equity and fairness perspective. There's no equity or justice baked into the markets. Governments are responsible for keeping us safe, and governments need to cooperate in order to ensure equity and justice and fairness. And right now, countries in the global south are being pushed to expand fossil fuel development under the guise of turning the lights on in Africa, under the guise of development. But that fossil fuel so-called development doesn't turn the lights on in Africa. This is about using Africa and Asia as Europe's gas station and leaving the mess behind and the dependency behind. So again, that's why we need cooperation. What does work? I think 4 things. First of all, we need to organize. This is the grunt work of social change. I often hear when I'm doing campaign strategy workshops, people say to me, well, we've done a rally and we've done a petition. Yeah, do it again. This work requires repetition. It requires constant vigilance and organizing. And we also need to stop shitting, excuse my language, on the organizing that others do. There's not one tool in our toolbox that's going to end the fossil fuel industry. We need the litigation. We need the rallies. We need the protests. We need the policy work. We need the work with governments. We need all of it. We need all the tools in our toolbox. So it just doesn't mean we don't need to be critical and make them better, because God knows we need to make them better because we're failing. But we do need to be movement generous. This movement is so good at attacking each other. Some of the folks that I used to work with on the Keystone Pipeline in Nebraska used to have a saying where they said, look, people, it's rumps in and horns out, which I thought was a great visual, attack outside, support inside. And we're not very good at doing that. We need to be creating trusted networks and relationships with individuals and people and building our lists in order to build this movement. We need to do that, secondly, through having communications that is accessible and talks about vision and values. The right is so good at doing this, on reframing our ability to use fossil fuels as freedom, on jumping on every moment, like the floods in Valencia, to call for more fossil fuels. The Ukraine war, more fossil fuels. The tariffs, that means we need more fossil fuels. They use those moments to connect people's anger and concern to their agenda. And we're too careful, and we're too policy focused, and we talk too much about the mechanisms that we believe need to happen and not the vision of the world that we want to achieve. We need to paint a vision, and we need to talk about people's values. And fairness, freedom, those should be our area. Because the fact is, that's what moving away from fossil fuels does. And the fossil fuel industry is not fair. We have a lot of the data and information that we need now. Look to the work of Influence Map, which gives you the data to show the influence of the fossil fuel industry, how much they're lobbying, how much they're spending, how they're weakening laws. Look to the research of carbon majors that shows you that a very small number of companies are responsible for the majority of emissions today, and the incredible work of the Make Polluters Pay campaigns, because they speak to people around fairness, those values, and that will motivate people. And I would say, thirdly, look, let's not vilify all the people who have worked in the fossil fuel industry or who use fossil fuels, because when you look at climate psychology research, guilt is what turns people away from this work. Sure, there are bad people out there, but most people are good people stuck in bad systems. So let's talk about those bad systems and about those companies while giving the individuals who grew up maybe wanting to be an engineer and end up in the fossil fuel industry, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. But when they tell you that they're working from the inside to change the fossil fuel industry, tell them to get out. This is not an industry that's going to become renewable energy companies. These huge companies that are fossil fuel companies are not structured to become diversified energy companies. And when they say they're part of the solution, like they have been for the last 20 years, don't believe them.
Thank you.
Can I just quickly add in something?
Yes, please.
How evil are the fossil fuel industry? The number of people who are killed, the mortality rate of fossil fuel specific air pollution is 10 million people a year. The fossil fuel industry is knowingly, completely unnecessarily causing the deaths, let alone suffering and disease, the deaths of 10 million a year. There's nothing more evil than that. And we don't hear that often enough because, of course, we're focused on climate change. But fossil fuel burning does not just produce the worst pollution ever, which is greenhouse gases. It produces air pollution, and now it produces microplastic pollution. And microplastic pollution, as we know, is everywhere. It's a fossil fuel-derived product. It's in our brains, it's in our food, but also it's in all the plants in the world. That means all our crops. Microplastics are in the roots, the stems, and the leaves of crops. Therefore, we have another cause, which is caused by the fossil fuel industry, of further accelerating the already accelerating global warming. So I did want to mention that. And I also want to mention that, yes, I was totally impressed with my deep read of the Fossil Fuel Treaty. Yeah, they have air pollution, they have subsidies, they got it all, they've got everything. And I want to stress again, it is the only act in town that can work, and it is working. It's highly successful. Everybody get out there, join, support the Fossil Fuel Treaty. That really is the answer in my view. Now, go vegan for sure, but support the Fossil Fuel Treaty.
I definitely have to agree with you there. I want to pick up on something, Zappa, that you mentioned about how the media kind of perpetuates this, the way that they use media stories to justify increased use of fossil fuels. And of course, I think we all know that terrible statistics like Peter just shared, those 10 million deaths a year, those aren't reported on in the media. So I was wondering if you guys have any thoughts about what role media and culture could play in breaking fossil fuel dominance rather than perpetuating it.
I can jump in there if you want. Up to 2009, the media were absolutely terrible. The media was basically supporting the denying campaign, which was started in 1989 by the American fossil fuel corporations. And that campaign is still going on. It's still strong. It's still maliciously clever. All right. And since then, the media have improved. But over the past few years, I've noticed they've stopped improving. They're not linking, as they have been doing, climate change and global heating to all of these rapidly increasing extreme weather events. That is hardly happening at all now. Look, we have a repeat scenario in northern Canada, actually mid-Canada, of the unbelievable 2023 fires that you'll remember. The same thing is happening. Same thing is happening today. I checked yesterday, and there were 3,800 square miles of northern Canada on fire. Today, it's 4,247. These fires are across the prairies, but not only on the prairies. The media keeps on saying they're in the prairies. They're right across Canada, right across Canada. We now have a big fire started in Quebec. So that's right across the 3,000 miles of Canada. So I guess it means that we have to write to the media. I don't do that very much. I should be doing it again. But we're very dependent on the media, but of course they're dependent on, the advertising. It's always an SUV, right? It's always a big, big honking new black car. Yeah. So, yeah, we're run by the money, but we have to beat the money.
I want to add a couple of things to what Peter said. First of all, support independent media. That means buying your subscriptions if you have the capacity. That means circulating their stories. There are some independent alternative media that are doing a great job on climate, and we need to support them. And, secondly, I would say absolutely communicate directly with reporters, with editorial boards, and let them know you're noticing that they're, for example, not connecting fossil fuels to extreme weather, that they're not telling the truth on science. I mean, for 10 years, many of us met with editorial boards over and over and over again to explain to them that having a balanced picture on climate change didn't mean taking one of the 10% of scientists that don't believe it's happening and putting them with the 90% that do. That's not balance. And it took a long time to shift that. That has shifted now. But what we are seeing is a failure to connect extreme weather events and disasters with climate change, and definitely not with fossil fuels. A silence around climate and fossil fuels, and that we have to talk about it. We have to ensure that we put it in front of them, but also create your own trusted communication networks. Our currency is our lists, is our engagement with our organizations, our communities. We need to talk about climate change. If you look at the polling by Oxford or Yale, a lot of these amazing polling that's has been done. Also potential energy with their later is too late polling. If you look at any of that, you see that about 80% of the world believes we need more climate action, believes in climate change, but they kind of think they're alone and they're a little bit embarrassed to talk about it. It's a bummer. They still use fossil fuels. So we have to talk about it. Our job is to find those people and to motivate them. Sometimes I think of social change kind of like a funnel. There's this fire hose of information, and we have to funnel it to action, to key moments and key ideas, like the fossil fuel treaty.
Yeah, so if I might add a few things, or just my thoughts on this, because I feel really the only kind of industry I think that, well, I'm almost, I just say I'm almost as mad at the mainstream media as I am at the fossil fuel industry, because they've failed us so badly, and they failed the planet so badly. And I know a lot of great journalists who are doing everything they can, but somehow there's the system includes the media system. So in the U.S., there's kind of two main branches of the mainstream media. Well, let me go back, take a step further back. So there's two really really obviously broken things about the way the system works in the United States, right? So one of them is that it's completely legal for corporations to give as much money as they want to politicians, right? So that's Citizens United, and that makes everything fucked. And the second one is that it's completely legal for media corporations like Fox News to just straight out lie on the air and spread propaganda to the people that listen to them, right? So that's the fairness doctrine. So it's hard. It's kind of a really catch-22, because we need to fix those two things, in my view, before those two things make it so hard for our movement to progress as quickly as it should, right? But it feels like it's very hard to fix those two things until we have a strong enough movement. Um, so anyway, in the US, there's kind of two branches of the mainstream media. There's the completely lying part, which is why we have Trump as president right now, or one reason why, right? So they literally spread propaganda. Both my parents, unfortunately, are Trump supporters. It's very, very hard for me to talk to them because they're working from a completely divergent set of information that is completely like divorced from reality. So that makes it very hard to have any kind of conversation, right? Which is why things feel so divided and why it's so hard to unify against the billionaire class. And then the second branch of the media in the US is basically, I kind of think of it as the New York Times part. And they're still, they don't, they don't straight up lie like the other branch, but they withhold a lot of information in my view. And they still take money from the fossil industry. They still, accept advertising dollars, which is a huge problem. Like why, if you know that this industry is lying and deceiving us and destroying the planet and destroying our children's future and destroying life on the only place we know to have life, why the fuck would you take their advertising dollars? It's why would you do that? I would never do that. I'd rather live under a bridge than support myself through fossil fuel dollars, right? So, and this branch of the media, which could really help us by expressing the genuine urgency that we really have, that I see as a climate scientist, they sometimes they do great reporting on impacts. Like they have these really fancy multimedia things which do a great job explaining like extreme heat waves, right, that might occur, or the fires that might be occurring. But they always stop short of the three critical things that they should be telling to really tell the whole story. And so in my view, this is journalistic malpractice because they're not giving the public the full story, which would allow the public to join our movement, right, if they knew. So the first thing that they don't say is this is caused by the fossil fuel industry. Right. The second thing they don't say is, and the fossil fuel industry has been lying and blocking action systematically for 50 years. Right. That's part of the story. And the third thing that every now and then they do a little bit of this, but they don't do it enough, is that basically this will all get worse and worse as long as there is a fossil fuel industry. And, they project into the future, like how much worse things are going to get, like in different various scenarios. They don't provide that sort of future projection, and they don't give a sense to the public that everything is at stake, right? They never say things like billions of lives are at risk in this sort of like quote unquote good side of the mainstream media. Like every now and then maybe that'll come through in like a guest essay or an op-ed, but this should be part of every single story on a climate impact that there is, because this is reality. And I remember a few years ago, Roger Hallam made some statement about billions of lives being at risk. And I can't remember the name of it, but there was something where, climate scientists would comment on like major stories in the media and comment on the accuracy of them. I can't remember what that thing was, but I was part of it. And so I remember where that one came up, like I was, one of the three maybe people who commented, and I was like, there's no evidence to that for us to confidently say that billions of lives aren't at risk. But the other climate scientists that commented it were like, this is unhinged, don't scare the public, So I don't think that the public knows everything that's at stake. And I'm not a fan of scaring people unnecessarily, but I do think that a lot of good people out there would be doing more to help propel the movement in whatever way they could if they knew what was truly at stake. And somehow, and I agree with what Zipporah said, that there is this sense, all the good people, there's so many good people out there. And I think far too many of them feel like they're alone somehow. And, that's the work of the movement. But it just really strikes me that the movement, I've been trying to help build this movement since 2006, and it's been so slow going. And I think a lot of that is because we're really fighting this, having to swim upstream against this sort of media that's either straight out lying or is like leaving out really important parts of the story so that people don't know the real urgency here? Sorry, I went on a lot longer than I thought, but that was a good question.
Don't apologize. That was brilliant. Yeah, we're kind of nearing the end of this session, and I think we've heard a lot of pretty scary things about the fossil fuel industry. But I think the reason we're all on this call, we're all a part of this convention, is because we still do have a bit of hope. We need to, don't we, in order to keep going. So I wanted to ask you all, what gives you hope that we can still win this fight?
I can answer that quickly. Phoebe, you do. The people who give me hope are the protesters. Yeah. And they're protesting against governments, right? Who are locking them up, who are incarcerating them for doing next to nothing, for doing no harm whatsoever. You give me hope, great hope. You're wonderful, wonderful people. And most of you are very young. I know not all of you, but most of you. And that's about it, I think. I think that's pretty well everything that gives me hope.
I do want to answer your question, but I also want to very quickly address two things that came up in the chat that I think are really important. One, just a couple of resources for you all. Incredible book published last year by Dr. Genevieve Gunther called The Language of Climate Politics, Fossil Fuel Propaganda and How to Fight It. So helpful. Take a look at it. She's done so much research, put it all in one place for you all. Also on hope, the book Not Too Late, that Rebecca Solnit put together with Thelma Young, Lutananga. I read it all the time. And whenever I get super depressed or anxiety ridden, I go back to Not Too Late. That is an incredible selection of essays, super helpful. And then finally, I do want to just quickly address this question of, but isn't renewable energy and electrification worse or just as bad because of critical mining, et cetera? And I think it's really important that you all understand that a lot of the criticism that we've seen of electric cars, of renewable energy, et cetera, that's being pushed right now online comes from the fossil fuel industry. They're taking some legitimate concerns that we have to deal with, and they're expanding them. So people say it's just the same, or it's just as bad, and we have to be very wary of that because the fact is it's not just the same. The fossil fuel economy takes 565 times more mining than the clean energy economy. There's no question that there are problems with critical mining, and we have to ensure that we get more critical minerals from what's already on the surface of the earth. We need closed loop circular systems. We need better legislation. We need to make sure that we're not mining in the heart of biodiversity and human rights hotspots or water hotspots. Absolutely, there should be no-go areas for critical mining. We need to be careful. But the idea that these are somehow equivalent is absolutely absurd. Fossil fuel mining is constant mining to feed a fossil fuel system. Renewable energy and electrification is the creation of that initial infrastructure and not constant for the rest of our lives. And then finally, a sentence about hope, your actual question, Phoebe. I just don't think hope is something we have. Hope is something we create. You're creating it every day with your actions. That is what gives me hope. Every morning I sit down, and even with the deluge of what's hard, I think about, what am I going to do today? What is the peace that I'm going to achieve? That is our responsibility. Hope is not something we just get to have. It's a responsibility. I think especially as a parent, I think of it as a responsibility every day to create the world that we think is possible, and it is happening out there. And I feel so lucky to be working on the Fossil Fuel Treaty, because every day something exciting happens. The World Congress of Churches just endorsed, this city endorsed, this university endorsed, this, the state of California has endorsed. Just this year, Pakistan came on board for the treaty. Every day there's good news. If you're lacking in good news, sign up to get the newsletter from the Fossil Fuel Treaty, because this movement is growing and it gives me hope.
Yeah, wow. What great answers. I think what the things that give me hope, I do see people slowly starting to wake up. And I don't think that that's a process that can be reversed very easily, despite all of the propaganda coming from the fossil fuel industry, coming from the fascists around the world. People are starting to make the connection that the billionaire class is the problem, extractive colonial capitalism is the problem. I remember how a few years ago, when Twitter was still before Elon Musk torpedoed Twitter, like to say things critical of capitalism, people would really didn't understand that because they were so indoctrinated. And I think now more and more people, it's hard to gauge these things, right? Because we activists kind of surround ourselves with other activists, so it's a little hard to tell how much that's propagating. But I do think people are starting to really make these connections. And that makes sense, right? Because the impacts are getting worse. So, I am saddened that it's already 2025. And, 2006, when I started to really kind of get involved with the movement, 2020 was kind of my bright line. I'm like, but at the very latest, we'll all be on board by then. We'll all be pulling in the same direction together. And it'll be sad because, the coral reefs will be dying and we'll have lost so much, but we'll be grateful to know that we're going in the right direction. And I think we're still going to get there. We'll lose a little bit more. And it's going to be a little later than I originally thought. But then, yeah, being part of this movement is the greatest privilege of all. And the people who take risks, who put their careers on the line, who put their bodies on the line, who put their freedom and their lives on the line, are the most beautiful people. And so grateful for all of you. And to be part of that is the honor of a lifetime. And so I walking through a forest or running through a forest and being among the trees and thinking about the movement gives me hope.
Thank you so much, everyone. Despite having spent most of my day on Zoom, I really would quite like to be able to stay here and ask you all a lot more questions, but that is a really nice moment to end on. So thank you, Zapara. Thank you, Peter Carter and Peter Kalmus. And I'm going to hand back over to Robin now to tell us what's coming next for the convention.
Yo, thank you so much, everyone. That was a fantastic session. You're getting so much love on the live stream right now. The emojis are pouring in. If you can, people across the world, we want to build this convention. We want to not just have it as a one-off event, we want to have it regularly. We're going to have another one in the autumn time. We'd love to have all these fantastic speakers back and get it bigger and bigger. Zoom events, the tech providers behind it have told me their biggest ever event was 40,000 people. I think we can top that. I think we can top that next time. So, we're 100 of us zoomed in right now, but we start off small and we grow and we grow. For me, the hopeful moment was 2019, taking the streets of London, taking the streets of capitals across the world with thousands of people in this kind of protest, cultural rebellion, that pushed governments to make these rapid decisions. And I've set my life mission on that. I'm building it again now with people in the revolution in the 21st century. If you can, please support the movement. Drop a regular donation. This is a people-powered movement. We've had £6,000 in donations so far today. It's fantastic. We've had dozens of new regular donors who are helping this movement keep going. And please do check out the fantastic work on the Fossil Fuel Treaty, Peter Kalmus's Substack, Peter Carter's YouTube channel, regularly dissecting all of this information. It is so, so valuable. We're building the social movements to put that non-proliferation treaty in place. And it's just an honor to be with you all to do it. Next up, we have our final session of the day, 12 hours after I have started on these Zoom calls, quite an epic feat, is Apocalyptic Optimism with the fantastic sociologist Dana R. Fisher, Dr. Nafis Ahmed, and Claire Farrell, one of my fellow co-founders of Extinction Rebellion, on, what we're going to do next, what's the morale. We've had a fantastic ending note to this talk to speed charge us into that. So thank you all so much for joining. I'll see you all in the next session. Tzipora, Peter, Phoebe, thank you so much. Take care.